Hey, everybody. Welcome to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. We are streaming on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe there. And please like and share, like and share. Meet me on Facebook on the Santita Jackson and Friends page, not the Santita Jackson page. No, no, no. I had to get that page so I could get the other page so I could bring the whole family together. So please, everybody, meet me and join me on the Santita Jackson and Friends page and tell people about us. Tell people about us. And you can stream the show live also if you're out and about on not only on YouTube and Facebook on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and on the Facebook channel, the Santita Jackson Show, Santita Jackson and Friends page, but go to AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Chad Larson and Brett Johnson and that whole team. That whole family do such a great job getting the progressive voices out there. It's so important. And they are supporting just progressivism. We thank God that Rashida Tlaib has a voice through this station, that Ilhan Omar has a voice through this station. Keith Ellison has a voice through this station. Cori Bush has a voice through this station. The progressives, Jamal Bowman, and on and on and on. We're talking about these progressives. $100 million, APAC announced, has been put into a fund to take them and other progressives, real progressives, out. What does that mean? And you're seeing more and more red lines being drawn in the sand about who people are going to vote for. You cannot fearmonger people into voting in 2024. That's not going to work. Leslie Williams from Jewish Voice for Peace. It's not working. Reverend Dr. Todd Deary, senior pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore, Maryland, that iconic church, and national leadership team of Rainbow Push, will be welcoming Dr. Saba Abour, brilliant Palestinian American activist. Indeed, she is part of the team that ushered through the ceasefire resolution in the Chicago City Council, making Chicago the largest city in the United States to affirm our support for ceasefire. And of course, we will have Livonia Perryman, a brilliant political operative, award-winning radio and TV host down through the years. So let me get right to you. I've got Livonia on, and we're going to get Reverend Dr. Deary back up. But let me go to you, Leslie. You were making some points about young people. I can't wait to get Saba Abour on to talk about that. But what about young people? I mean, they are. Everyone says that young people are not serious. Leslie Williams, that is not true.
Well, they're definitely serious, but they have a lot of skepticism about the political process and about the electoral process. And they need to feel inspired. They need to feel that it's going to make a difference. And I think what you hear over and over again is there's not that big a difference between the parties. And, we would disagree with that. But I think for a lot of them, particularly with something like what's going on in Gaza, this whole bipartisan commitment to Israel does confirm for them that maybe there is not really that great a difference between the parties. So to actually get them to feel that it's really going to make a difference to vote is, I think, challenging in this moment. But it's also challenging in terms of what difference is this actually making to my life in terms of my ability to get a job, in terms of my ability to get a college scholarship, in terms of my ability to get healthcare. And, Biden has pointed to many of the things that he's done and many of the initiatives that he has taken on that have actually addressed all of those issues. But a lot of the young people that I talk to say, well, I don't really see my life being that much better than it was 4 years ago. So they're not going to support Trump. But the feeling is, what is it? What can you show me that really can assure me that my life is going to be that much better if I vote for Biden? And does Biden really support my values? Does Biden truly support a human rights focused foreign policy? And many of them are saying that they're not seeing that. So I think part of the challenge is, how do we motivate these young voters to feel that a second Biden presidency is really going to make that difference?
Well, or at least if you don't vote Cori Bush, we lose her. We lose Jamal Bowman. We
Well,
lose.
yeah, and I think I think it was Dr. Yuri who was saying that there's a difference between the presidential election and the congressional elections. With someone like Cori Bush, who has been out in the field on the ground and people know her and they know her activism, I think it's a little bit easier to motivate a lot of those people who have worked side by side with her in the trenches to come out for her and to support her. And as several people have said, it's not just the money, it's that energy in getting people to be willing to pound the pavement and get out the vote drives and make sure people have a plan to vote and everything else that ensures a successful turnout. But I think it's much easier to do with someone like a Cori Bush than it is for Biden. But of course, what I think people worry about in things like the Listen to Michigan campaign, we know that often if people are not motivated to vote in the presidential election, they may be less motivated to vote in the other down ballot elections. And there's always the fear that if people don't vote in the presidential elections, that they won't vote in the down ballot elections. And I think that's another big challenge that we're facing.
Oh, I mean, Dr. Abor, I think I've got you now. Dr. Abor?
Hey, yes, can you hear me?
Hey, what about young people? What do you see them motivated to vote? Will they not vote in the president not vote for president and vote for other offices? Or, I mean, what do you think? What is happening with young people? It's just because it just seems like it's an incredibly active time politically.
Yeah, I was thinking about this because a couple of friends and I, we were all talking about it. I think what's going to end up happening is I think it'll be specific to the districts that folks are going to vote in. If there's somebody that they're excited about, they will go and vote. Does that mean that they're going to vote for Trump or Biden? I don't think so. I think a lot of people are really disengaged unless they have a local candidate that they're really serious about. For example, like members like Congresswoman Cori Bush, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, etc. I think people will go out and vote for them. But I mean, the wave right now all over social media is to vote, write in ceasefire, write in uncommitted. Well, I think for the primary it's write in uncommitted, and then for slash ceasefire. I mean, we'll see. I really don't foresee people coming out in droves for Biden. I think what the past 4 months have showed us is that the Democratic Party is willing to throw everything away for to continue to support Israel. And I think that's opened up a lot of people's eyes where they're like, wait, hold on a second. They're telling Arab Americans and Muslims and anybody who cares about Palestine that you need to suck it up and take one for the team because Trump is going to be worse. And it's like, what worse? What could be worse than 30,000 people dying? I don't know. I mean, yes, Trump will be worse than Biden, but at the same time, I mean, for someone like me who is Palestinian, or for other folks who do really care deeply about this issue, they're both the same to us. And so for me personally, I'm not voting for either. I didn't vote for Biden last election. I didn't vote for anyone. I wrote my friend in because I am that kind of a person. But for me, I think it's important to take a stance on those issues where, and this was something that to the community, I was really upset about when folks just were like, okay, well, we have to support President Biden because if we don't support President Biden, we're going to get Trump. But the problem with that was there was no tangibles that people went to the president with and were like, hey, these are the things that we want for our community. No, people were just in constant defensive mode where we're like, we need to do this, otherwise we're going to have Trump. And I think that's one big problem with the Democratic Party in general. we're always like on the defensive. The argument is always, oh well, if we don't vote for Biden, the Republicans are worse. And it's like, to be honest, I mean, for some groups, subsets of people, they're the same. We get treated as a Palestinian, as a Muslim. I'm going to get treated the same from the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Neither one has my interests. And so the people that do have my interests are the ones that are out in the streets, the people that are lobbying their elected officials for progressive legislation to make actual changes for within our communities. If you look at it, every single civil rights movement, every single social movement, every change happened because of resistance and because of people being out in the streets and refusing to be a part of the status quo. And to answer your question, which is a long-winded answer to your question, I don't think that people are going to come out unless there's a candidate that they're really serious about. And even then, I don't think people are going to come out and vote for the president unless something drastically different happens. But for me, 30,000 people dying is unforgivable. And that person will never have my vote. I will still go out and vote, but it's not going to be for either one of those candidates. Like, I'm writing somebody in. Maybe Santita, I'll write you in. That's a good idea.
Don't do that to me.
All right,
I love you.
Santita.
Love you. One Jackson in elective office is enough. Although I would not win, but that's okay.
No, but I'm serious. I think that the only way that change happens is by, there's elected officials who have come out and been, for example, on this issue, pro-Palestine, that we never in a million years would have thought would ever have come out, but they've come out because of the fact of peer pressure and public opinion shifting and people realizing that, wait, hold on a second, I'm going to be on the wrong side of history if I don't, come out in support of it. And so the conversation has changed. I mean, I'm 30 and I have never in my life seen the conversation shift in the way that it shifted. And a big part of that is because of people, the movement folks who've been on the ground, pushing it, agitating, showing up to everything and disturbing, elected officials and letting them know that no business as usual unless, we get what people are asking for. I mean, you look at it, Biden, right? And so this was actually, it was interesting. I had this conversation with Senator Carol Moseley Braun yesterday. She was the first Black U.S. Senator. And her and I had this conversation yesterday, and she brought up to me, she's like, oh, well, President Biden, she's like, he did a great speech on Friday, I think it was. And he's like, she said that we need a temporary ceasefire. But then he says that, right? And then they're also negotiating an arms deal package that they're trying to send over to Israel right now, is number one. And then number two, the United States said that they're going to vote down the United Nations resolution for a ceasefire. And it's like, well, don't go on stage and tell me that you want to call for a temporary ceasefire and that Palestinians also deserve, freedom, but your actions don't match with what you're saying. And so people are seeing through that. And social media has been our huge friend in this, of exposing what people are saying and what's actually happening. And listen, the TikTok kids, they're the ones that are teaching the younger generation. And one thing we always talk about is my last note is that in 20 years, if that, we're not going to be having these conversations anymore. People are going to be on the right side of history because what's happening is the younger generation is pro-Palestine, and people aren't scared to be unapologetically pro-Palestine anymore. People aren't scared. Like, they're being doxxed and they're like, okay, big deal. And what? People keep going, they keep moving. And then all it does is what's happening is people are seeing is it's white supremacy and Zionism that is trying to take down people of color who are speaking up for human rights. And all that does is it emboldens people to be even braver and to continue to speak out. They think that by trying to dox people, by calling them anti-Semitic, that it's actually going to help the cause out, or it's going to like quiet folks, but it's not. All it does is it actually proves to people that, hey, I'm on the right side of this, and they're going to continue to speak out, and it's only going to make them braver to speak out, because they're like, well, what else can you lose at this point, you know?
Livonia Perriman, we saw this 40 years ago when Reverend ran, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
this was the fiercest opponents that Reverend had, was that community. Rabbi Meir Kahana, they interrupted his announcement speech twice. I mean, that's part of the reason the Reverend Secret Service contingent was second in size only to that of the president's. I mean, that's just how ferocious. And he had the Nation of Islam. you needed
Absolutely.
you needed everybody because
So what happened with
moving
that?
this needle.
What happened? Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Oh, like where do you want me to begin? Well, in 1979, well, I met Yasser Arafat in Cuba at the World Youth Festival in 1978. I came home so enthusiastic about that. I told my parents, because Chairman Arafat reached out to me because he heard Reverend Jackson was there, Robert Mugabe was there, all these freedom fighters. And a lot of these freedom fighters, as you know, Livonia, would stay at our home.
Right.
Even though they were on paper terrorists, the ANC,
Right.
when they came to Chicago, they stayed at our house. So I got a chance to see Maurice Bishop in a different way because his ambassador to the United States, Decima Williams, when she came to Chicago, she stayed with us for a couple of weeks at a time. So that's my background. So when I came back from Cuba, I was full of excitement. The Chairman Arafat, had invited me to Lebanon to visit, and my parents were like, no, not going to happen. But what you can do is, my mother said, I will go. We just lost Dr. Abur, but I'll just continue. And what I will do is I will go because my mother always, as you know, Livonia, advanced Reverend on these international missions.
That's true.
That's how their partnership works. And when she came back, Leslie Williams and Reverend Dr. Erie, my mother was so devastated by what she saw and by the fact that the story that we've been given was so wrong. My mother had to stay in Paris for a week to decompress. She couldn't come home because, your hotel's blown up when you come back. The driver you had this morning is dead. It was just a mind-blowing experience. And so a few months later in the fall of 79, my parents went to the Middle East. They went to Lebanon and Israel. And boy, oh boy, that's when all HE double hockey sticks broke loose. You have this famous photograph of Reverend Jackson greeting Chairman Arafat. At the time, Chairman Arafat, and he hugged him, as you do when you greet people. And he even then was calling for a balanced policy because at that time we had a no-talk policy. No talk. You couldn't. I was saying to Saba Abur, at the time that Reverend and Mrs. Jackson went to the Middle East, she had a no-talk policy. You could not mention Palestinians in the public or even private political discourse. You couldn't mention them. And so my parents, these young kids, because neither of my parents were 40 at the time, they're talking about the Palestinians, and we got to do something about this. So when my mother got back from Lebanon, she went to see then UN ambassador, Andrew Young. And she said, you've got to meet with the Palestinians because what's happened, we have this story all wrong. We knew that this was wrong from what we'd heard in the 60s, Leslie Williams, but it is now exponentially worse. And we're sponsoring it now. We have to do something. And he told my mother, Jackie, this is the third rail of American politics. If I even look in the direction of Palestinians, I will lose my job. She said, what would Martin do? She said, all money ain't good money. You can't keep this job and do that. So, well, he did reach out to the Palestinian representative and he got fired. And he had to come and he came to push and spoke, but then he had to go to Africa to work, Dr. Abur, because he was blocked from working in the United States.
That's true. And
so from there, we kept on advocating for saying that Israeli security and Palestinian justice are married to each other. But you can't have a no-talk policy. That's not going to work. So Reverend did not actually want to run for president. He was trying to get Maynard Jackson to do it and Andrew Young to do it. They refused, but the people started calling for him to run. And part of his platform was Palestinian justice and Israeli security. And there was not just Reverend supporters were saying, run, Jesse, run. The Jewish Defense League had a campaign called Ruin, Jesse, Ruin. So, the death threats were quite serious and they were numerous. And so the Nation of Islam stepped in to give my father and my family security because it turns out we did need it. And so it was kind of funny when the Secret Service came in, as Livonia remembers, because they used to have confrontations, let's put it that way.
Yes. Yes.
Nation of Islam, our Nation of Islam didn't trust the Secret Service, and the Secret Service was scared of the Nation of Islam.
Not at all.
So all of that.
My mother didn't trust anybody.
No.
She said, my mother says, do not my mother shared with me, she says, don't stand too close to Reverend Jackson,
That's right.
That might be a serious move on your part. And she would not, like my parents, they would not allow me to go overseas to those meetings. My mother says, please don't do it. Because the Reverend Jesse Jackson knew, and he tried his best to build unity among the different people in the world. His campaign was not just for America. It expanded.
It was a world campaign.
Right.
It was. In fact, they changed the rules by 1988 so that the Secret Service could not travel with Reverend because Reverend went out of the country.
Yes, indeed.
1984.
Yeah.
And so, but Reverend kept on advocating, kept on pushing, and did not push he did not sacrifice one group for another. We've kept advocating and pushing, but 40 plus years ago when he ran, 40 years ago, you could not mention Palestinians on television. You would not accept Arab money in presidential campaigns. So you have to understand when Livonia and I in particular, because she was part of the campaign, she was an official in it. And Reverend Dr. Urey, who introduced Reverend at the beginning of the 88 campaign, to see this needle move this far, Leslie Williams, after October 7th, who would have thought you'd have 300,000 people marching in Washington in support of Palestinians? Huh? But I'm saying now you've got the baton. Reverend and that whole Jack Odell and so many nameless faceless people who really pushed this agenda. Well, you're part of a relay race, actually.
Absolutely. If I may interject, just think about this. Who would have thought in Michigan that there would be one city that is headed by Arab Americans, from mayor, city council, commissioners, delegates, school board chair? Just think about that. They won all of the main positions in Dearborn, Michigan. Arab Americans are in leadership in Dearborn, Michigan. As Reverend was, as you said, Santita, the baton was passed on. Someone was listening. Someone was learning. Someone was also teaching, learning, listening, and passing the baton. Today, right now, Arab Americans are in charge in Dearborn, Michigan. If I must say, I learned too. I was a professor at Henry Ford Community College. Now you said, why is she bringing up Henry Ford Community College? It is the college in Michigan that the majority of the students are Arab Americans. I had classes with students that I never saw their faces because the women were dressed in black from their nails to their feet. I taught English to Arab Americans who came to America. I was teaching them English, never saw their faces, and I gave them grades. You understand? So that's the environment that we're in today. This is not 10 years ago, 10 months ago. This is like yesterday, real time in Michigan. One, you have a school that is basically Arab Americans. They're getting their college degrees, graduating, and they have other people such as myself, which I feel very blessed. Some of the best students you could ever have. But I did not. Just think about it. I'm teaching young ladies who I would never see their face based on their culture. Never, I never asked for them to unveil themselves either. Never, never. And when they had to, and you know this, when they had to show their hair, if their hair fell apart, I excused them to go to the bathroom to take care of their cultural experience. That is what's happening in Michigan today, right now.
Well, I mean, and that just shows you how far things have, how much we've grown. We have clearly, Dr. Abor, a lot of things that we have to do. As you're looking fabulous, I told you your eyes are fabulous.
You're so funny. I have a question though.
Mhm.
So why do you think that? Oh, I mean, I guess money is probably power is involved with that. But so like growing up for me, I always tell this story. My mom was a refugee from 1967. My mother was forcibly expelled from her home, guns pointed at her. Her family, she had a female family member that was raped, and her family ended up getting displaced, and they had to walk 7 days to get to their next location, which is Batunia, which is in the West Bank now. So I always talk about this because if my mother had walked west instead of walking east, I would be in Gaza right now, and I might not be alive, and we would be in war right now. We would have lived under occupation our entire lives, and because my mother walked east instead of walking west, that changed the fate of our entire life. And it's crazy when you think about that. But growing up, my mother has always been terrified of law enforcement. Has always told us, like, don't tell people you're Palestinian, don't tell people you're Muslim. And our entire identity has been political, right? Because Palestinians, that's not a real thing to some folks. We're not identified as an ethnic group, etc. And so for me growing up, it was very hard because it was like, well, clearly people see me and they know that I'm not white, and they know that I'm maybe, like, before I wore the hijab, they're like, maybe could be Hispanic, but most likely she's like Arab or Indian or something of that nature. And so growing up, we were always told, like, don't tell people that you're Palestinian because of fear. My mother always thought that, we would get killed if someone ever found that out. And I think for me, that really, like, strengthened me in activism. And I was like, wait, hold on a second. I'm not going to, like, pretend I'm not somebody. And so I guess my point of this is that why has it taken so long for people to accept Palestinians, and I guess a part of it is like money, power, greed, etc. But I don't know, there's just something that just like flipped in me when you just were talking about how the gentleman was told if he spoke about Palestinians that he would be basically doxxed.
Well, let me say this. I must say it. I have to say it. Your experience as a Palestinian, what you have just shared with me and brought back in my mind is the historical impact of America on African Americans. You said, how long will it take? How long will it take? And you ask African Americans, how long will it take?
Yeah, no, 100%. And and that's something that I always talk. Yeah, it's something I always talk about. The same thing that Palestinians are facing in the West Bank and Gaza is the same thing our Black siblings here in America are facing. Brutal occupation. Palestinians. I mean, America's a little bit more progressive, but that is only because people fought back, right? And our Black siblings fought back. They resisted. They are in now places of power, but our siblings are still not free.
And
Oh, yeah.
so our people are just finally getting into like elected office. Our people are finally just being more open about the fact that like we're Palestinian and like what's happening is not okay. And so I think you make a great point, Ms. Perryman, is that you're right. I think that we're still like way behind
Yeah.
the curve.
Just ask how long.
Yeah,
Well,
we're still behind
could
the
I-
curve.
Could I just say something as an African American who's also worked on Palestine for about 10 years? Obviously, yes, as African Americans, we're always saying, how long is it going to take? And, you know, as Dr. Arbour was mentioning, we're fighting the same struggle and often fighting the very same people.
Yes.
That was the point of the Deadly Exchange campaign that highlighted the way that U.S. police who are beating up Black people in Ferguson are working with Israeli police who are beating up Palestinians in the West Bank. But there is a degree of hostility and hatred that I have experienced working for Palestine that I have never experienced just for working on African American civil rights. And it is truly shocking how so many people who claim to support civil rights and freedom of speech and democracy are cheerfully willing to throw all those principles out of the way the second you bring up Palestine.
But Leslie, what is that?
Well,
It's
so
just incongruous. And like you said, the hatred is so, oh my gosh, it's unlike anything I've ever seen in my life.
So obviously, a lot of it has to do with pro-Israel sentiment that is very tied into fears about anti-Semitism, fears which I would say are not completely unfounded, but are ratcheted up to an unreasonable degree, to the point that there are people who are unable to see anyone else as the victims other than themselves. And so, you know, I will talk to perfectly reasonable people in Chicago working on the ceasefire resolution who actually believe that passing a ceasefire resolution meant that Jews were no longer safe in Chicago and that there was going to be a second Holocaust. There are people that truly believe this. And then you have many other people who are not Jewish, who are not Palestinian, who are not Arab American, who are not Muslim, but who are very afraid of saying the wrong thing on either side, who are very afraid of being described as anti-Semitic. A lot of church groups that are extremely afraid of being tagged as anti-Semitic, even if they are simply asking for something as simple as a ceasefire resolution. And because of that, are willing to allow this over-the-top weaponization of anti-Semitism to take place, which then is used to silence Palestinians. And we know that the definition of anti-Semitism that Biden pushes and that many countries in Europe have pushed and that many jurisdictions here in the United States have pushed was specifically developed and promoted in order to suppress Palestinian speech. And like that, there is no question about that this definition was intentionally developed to silence Palestinian speech. So there are many different actors involved in this. There's Christian Zionism. There is the mainstream Jewish community, the federations, the Anti-Defamation Leagues, which also, by the way, the Anti-Defamation League was responsible for killing a New Orleans human rights ordinance simply because it included anti-Palestinianism in one of the things that the human rights ordinance was supposed to address. So you have a human rights ordinance that was supported by African Americans and Latino Americans and Asian Americans and all sorts of different people that would have prevented the city of New Orleans from dealing with any organization or country that was violating human rights of any of these different groups. And the Anti-Defamation League and the federations in Louisiana made sure that that got struck down because it included Palestinians. So it would have meant that you wouldn't be able to discriminate against Palestinians. So that's how deep it goes, that pushing for the silencing of Palestinians becomes more important to an awful lot of people than pushing for civil rights overall or pushing for the interests of other minority groups overall.
Well,
Right.
why do you think that's the needle is moving, Leslie?
Well, I think the needle's moving. I mean, Dr. Abur mentioned a couple of reasons why the needle was moving. I think one thing with young people in this, and just really this time period, is it is much harder to deny what is going on in Palestine than it used to be, because you're not just relying on the New York Times anymore. You've got people like Mohammed El Kurd and his sister, whose name I'm blanking on, who have been documenting the attempts to take over their home since they were 10 years old. And you've got people who are making TikToks and who are on the ground showing you in real time what is happening to people in Gaza. So it's just harder and harder to deny the enormous human rights atrocities that are going on. But I think also there was a visit by a group, Dream Defenders, which is an African American led organization that works on issues of human rights for African Americans and for marginalized people here in the United States, that did a delegation to Palestine and talked to young Palestinians and talked about how they had so many interests in common. During the Ferguson uprising, young Palestinians were emailing and texting young African Americans on how to avoid and how to treat the tear gas injuries that they were receiving, and how to avoid kettling and some of the other techniques that were being used against young African Americans. So, they are seeing, because of the reach of social media, they're seeing what is going on. They look and see how similar attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank look to attacks on young African Americans in US cities. And they are making that connection, and they are demanding that if we have a human rights policy, it has to be a consistent human rights policy, which ours has never been as far as Palestine is concerned.
Reverend Dr. Yeary?
When we think about this moment, and I've been listening to the conversation, I was taken back to the moment of Dr. King's first entree into the leadership space at 26 years old, leading the Montgomery bus boycott. That the moment that confronts us when we start talking about who is going to be in this moment, who's going to rise to the occasion, it really is going to be young people. When we think about SNCC and CORE and all of those groups who were part of the movement in that day, when we think about even the slogan, Black Power, when Willie Ricks is talking to Stokely Carmichael before he takes on the identity of Mukasa, and then he's in the cafeteria at Morehouse when I'm a student there, talking to us as we're going through the lunch line, talking about how we have to be engaged in the movement. When we consider what this moment actually comes down,
so let me just put that.
Well, thank you for dropping that nugget. I appreciate I appreciate that. Look, you gonna make sure you represent your school. I ain't mad at you. Look, but
Our school.
Come on.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I know Livonia got her mass in before I could clear my throat good, and so we already know where we are. But in this moment, I think there's a generation that now has to rise to the occasion and make it their movement.
Yes.
Even though they're not personally familiar with what has caused the urgency of this moment. If we were to talk about this on Sunday morning, we would talk about the generation who knew not Moses. Right? There is a generation who doesn't necessarily know the struggle for themselves, but they recognize that the reality of their current predicament calls them and requires of them to get engaged and seize the moment and put us on a trajectory that moves us closer to justice. And so I think it is a moment that we have to remember that when Dr. King led the Montgomery bus boycott, Reverend was a teenager. And that then rising out of that, Reverend assumes leadership with Breadbasket, and then becomes Operation Push, and then becomes the Rainbow Coalition as part of his political campaign and his presence of inviting folks into a conversation that becomes relevant to them in real time. I was a teenager when I introduced Reverend at Durham High School in 1983, when he was on his Southern Crusade, and he was inviting us, even encouraging us to be part of the solution, that if we did not seize the moment and not wait for somebody to just give us permission to move from the kiddie table and get involved in the real situation that was affecting our people, we were going to miss our moment. And so I think we have to look at that being the window of opportunity that invites us to get that generation to be active in this moment, so that we don't get stuck in this kind of exclusive conversation that says only people with a certain experience, a certain background, a certain frame of reference can be a part of this solution. I think that is the generation that is really going to get us out of the precarious situation in which we find ourselves, and finally get us to a point of moral clarity that allows us to take a stand, not based on party affiliation, but on principle affiliation. And that's where I think the difference really matters.
And I think that's how things are shifting in America, which is why I felt Leslie and Livonia and Reverend Dr. Uri, that it was important that we hear Saba. She felt that she was giving a lengthy explanation. It was like, no, you're giving us a window into your thinking and
Correct.
into where you are. Because I know when I was in college, Leslie, when we were in college, when Reverend first ran, it was, wait a minute. One of the expressions was, damn straight you need a Black candidate. But as Reverend explained in his announcement speech, which you remember so well, Livonia Perryman, he said, I am a Black candidate, that is to be sure, and I've had the Black experience in America. But this is an American campaign.
That's right.
But it's an American campaign from the bottom up perspective, from our perspective. And so that enabled him to bring in a Jim Zogby and put him with a Ron Walters and put him with a Bob Borsage and a Frank Watkins and a Jack Odell. I mean, all things and all people were equal. And let's come to this table and let's work these issues out. Women, you all, because remember, Reverend told us to organize the National Political Congress of Black Women after the '84 convention. He said, no, Black women need to get organized. Specifically, C. Dolores Tucker headed up those efforts. And so I just think that when I see Dr. Saba Abor, and when I see you and your journey, Leslie Williams, I see people growing, and I see us seeking to grow, and I see Livonia just going from strength to strength to strength all the time. You just never ever stop. I mean, now you're helping Hill Harper, and you're telling him, hey, young man, son, this is the way you need to do this. I've got all this experience. I don't want to sit on it. I want to give it to you. Because things have changed, but they ain't changed.
But can I mention one thing that has never changed, and that is the tendency of power structures, particularly white power structures, to divide and conquer, to attempt to divide and conquer. And you were asking why there was so much hostility against Palestinians. I think that is often part of the divide and conquer strategy. The fact that we're seeing so many African American and Latin American candidates being used to fight against Palestinians is part of this divide and conquer. And I think that it is always essential that marginalized people, people of color, LGBTQ people, stick together and see we have so much more in common than the people that are working against us. And instead of Black people allowing themselves to take money from organizations like AIPAC and run against progressives who are working with Palestinians, who are working with people working for justice on the border, that it is absolutely essential that people of color and other marginalized groups of people stick together, whether we are wealthy or not, that we as people of color have interests in common and that we need to be supporting each other. And thank goodness that Harper Hill recognizes that.
Oh, well, that he did not let his personal ambitions
I just want to share
override the
you.
needs of the collective, which I think is what's happened, unfortunately, with this Wesley Bell. Something happened, Livonia.
And I don't know Wesley Bell's full story, but
Me either.
but
So I mean,
it's driven.
let me just say
But
this for the
guess
sake
what?
of the radio audience. So
He
we are
invited.
speculating. We're not
Right.
saying that he accepted money because we don't know.
Right.
We just know that this sounds eerily like the Hill Harper story.
Yes.
He didn't even have time, everybody, to change his posters. He put white masking tape over the U.S. Senate so he could run for Cori Bush's seat.
He ain't get a whole lot of money if he had to use masking tape on his signs. I'm just saying.
I have never seen anything like. I mean, when I read that,
that is a first.
I said, "No, this is too rich."
Right, but that tells you the depth of his commitment, and there's really no commitment to the community or to the passion of speaking truth to power. That tells us that this is a motion for, this is my opinion about him, that he would take whatever move that needs to get him to where he needs to go, and anybody in his way will be in jeopardy. I want to go back to Hill Harper. Hill Harper, just think about it, is in a community, and many of you already know this. He is living in a community where you're absolutely correct that there's a divide and conquer syndrome. Every other month, there's an argument about the Arab Americans are taking our gas stations, our stores, murdering our children, shooting each other. This is a conversation that's in the news every month. This has been going on for years. I've been back home for 20 years. This is where we are in, even though the Dearborn is ran by and organized by the Arab Americans, but the media and the people are really kind of concerned. African Americans are whispering, Palestinians are whispering. So we're whispering, but are we coming together? That is the backdrop of Hill Harper saying, you know what, I'm going to try to bring them together, and I am not going to fall for the okie doke. I am not going to fall for the 20, and I'm using the word, the numbers so people can understand the significance of it. $20 million offer to take away the rights, the word, the voice, the face of the Palestinians in America. Tlaib represents Michigan, Detroit, basically, but she really represents America and the Palestinians in America, and people know that. And so they are really trying their best to really put a wedge between African Americans and the Arabs in Michigan. I mean, it's ongoing today.
And I'm hoping that I've only got about 4 minutes left, but I want everyone to get at least 30 seconds in before we go. Livonia, 30 seconds for you.
30 seconds. That I believe that you're absolutely correct, Reverend. It is about the young adults. It's about messaging. It's about the passion and about the truth that needs to be told. And people, believe it or not, the young folks are going to step up, step out, and they are and will make a difference.
They're showing up and they're showing out. Leslie
That's
Williams.
Right. Palestine is part of the progressive value system. It is not a separate issue. It's not a fringe issue. It's not a special interest issue. It is part of the progressive value system. And, we're asking how do you tell if somebody's really a progressive? I think Palestine is truly a politician's position on Palestine is really a good way to see if they are legitimately progressive. Because if you're progressive, you don't support apartheid and genocide, and you don't support bombing 30,000 people to death. You just don't do that. So I don't think we will really have a strong progressive candidate or strong progressive political party unless that is embraced.
Well, as the song says, Reverend Dr. Uri, which side are you on? Which side are you on? It seems like we're at that inflection point in history where people have to declare themselves, Reverend Dr. Uri.
And there are more inflection points that we must take notice. One will be this week when Algeria is now a new member of the UN Security Council serving their 2-year term, is going to put forth a resolution calling for a ceasefire. we will see what the world powers on that important branch of the UN will have to say about just calling for a pause in the fighting to allow for a conversation about the issues. This is an inflection point, and we all need to pay attention.
Dr. Saba Abor, the last 30 seconds belong to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts and for being allies in this fight. And I think what's incredibly important is that our communities, I mean, a couple people have mentioned this, is that we really come together. Leslie mentioned the same people that are oppressing Palestinians are oppressing our Black siblings, and et cetera. And my work started in Chicago, organizing in the South Side of Chicago, in predominantly Black neighborhoods. And what I've learned from there is how much more powerful we are when we're together. If we all come together, we can defeat Zionism and we can defeat white supremacy. And so that's my pledge, is always to be a true ally, especially to our Black siblings in this fight, is that this is not just a Palestinian fight. Once Palestinians are liberated, everyone is liberated, and vice versa. And so I just thank everyone for using your voices and your platforms to speak up for people that a lot of us really don't have, we may not have a dog in the fight, but at the end of the day, like, this is, if there's an injustice anywhere, if there's any injustice anywhere, is a threat to justice everywhere. And I really, truly believe that. So thank you, guys.
Well, you don't have to thank us, because as you just said, we're all siblings down here on this pilgrim journey. And that's it. That's all. We are brothers and sisters, children of the same God. May God bless you. Sending you all so much love today. Thank you for being with me today, for being with all of us here on the Santita Jackson Show. Sending you much love. God bless.
Thank you.